Well, Charles, what do you think about the attack on the Pentagon?
Well, I think what's interesting is that the central area of Washington is the most heavily surveilled region of the entire world. It has many hundreds of continuous feed video cameras. So that we have information that perhaps we don't have about the interiors of the Twin Towers, perhaps during the fires. We have, extremely good information about what was happening at any time in downtown Washington. And this information, there's no reason why this information couldn't be made public. That is to say, it doesn't relate to national security, it doesn't relate to the safety of public officials. What we're talking about is public area surveillance. The government has these tapes. The government, after the 9/11, the government systematically confiscated and sequestered hundreds and hundreds of these feeds from gas stations, from ATMs, from public buildings themselves. We have that is the answer to the question of what and how the Pentagon was hit. We have that answer. Well, we don't have that answer as the public. The government has that answer. So the question is, why not release it? And of course, what we're left with is it has not been released.
From all these tapes that have been confiscated, these cameras, we know that there are a lot of cameras on banks and stores. We've gotten, I think, 4 pictures, 4 still shots. Now, Frank and I are both lawyers, and as I recall from law school, before the police confiscate something, there's supposed to be a court order or some legal process. Frank, do you recall of any legal process involved in confiscating all those tapes from?
Absolutely. I don't believe there was any. It was all on the, it was 9/11. This was a national crisis. I don't think anybody even asked. It just happened.
Just raw power. The FBI agent at the point of a gun, you have to give over your tape. And why? Well, they don't want private citizens to have tapes and pictures that they can show on TV, on public access TV, and maybe question the official story, right?
Well, it's kind of another fantastic thing that's been told to the public is they've admitted, the Pentagon admits they have 86 cameras that have a video from that side of the Pentagon, and Freedom of Information requests have been put in repeatedly to get these videos released and denied. And at one point, the person who was in charge of that department released a statement saying that they don't show anything. So it's just not plausible. I mean, like Charles said, this is the most well-surveilled, and they're not going to have $10 cameras there. They probably have the best equipment you could buy. We've paid for it, I'm sure. Videotaping the side, they could probably see everybody that goes in and out of that place, and they probably have 86 good shots of what happened there. Explosion, plane crash, missile, whatever it is, they have a video. And there's only one reason why they wouldn't release it. It doesn't support their story. Because we've seen 100 times from every angle the planes hitting the World Trade Centers. Not once have we seen what happened there. It's the only explanation. Like Charles said, there's no legal reason. We're not protecting anybody. There's no secret thing that we'd find out about protecting our nation. They're just videos of this, and they're not being released. So it makes you wonder. And one other thing that was interesting is one of these great coincidences about the part of the Pentagon that got hit. They talk about how these guys did such a great job, and this would be the last place they would have picked to hit. Not only was it the hardest, like Frank said, from the angle they were coming of their plane, but there was the least number of people. There was thousands of people working in the Pentagon that day. The part they hit had the least number of people working, so there were going to be the least casualties. The least amount of casualties. So why would these vicious killers choose to kill the least number of people? And everybody, if they knew enough about the area, they would know where the most people were working. And it also was a strange coincidence. The day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld had announced that the Pentagon had misplaced $1 trillion. And once again, this is just a coincidence. The area that got hit was the accounting area that was going to be investigating this this
I
money
thought
that
it was
lost.
2.3 trillion.
Oh, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
When it gets that high, it doesn't even
Right,
matter.
right.
It was a lot of money. And it hit the accounting offices where they would have been investigating this. It was just a coincidence, but there's many odd coincidences like that you just think, it's
There's a
hard.
lot of convenient coincidences.
Convenient coincidence, that's a good explanation for
There
it.
was also a coincidence with Building 7. I think there was some, the offices of investigation of a number of corporate crimes were located
Enron.
there. And all the evidence got destroyed in Building 7 when it collapsed. Another coincidence. Of course, the Muslims, Al-Qaeda, they wouldn't know which side of the Pentagon to hit. They wouldn't know where all these documents are. All these coincidences couldn't go to their advantage, but we might ask who had control, whose advantage are all these coincidences for?
Another interesting thing, and just maybe the last point about the Pentagon, would be, and he was talking about the incredible security that should be around there, and people talk about the planes. This is probably a good place to segue. The planes, how did the planes all get through? It's really not conceivable to anybody to imagine that given over an hour to an hour and a half that we couldn't protect the capital of our country. It's just not conceivable. Most people knew between 8:30 and 9 o'clock that there was a serious problem going on. There was hijacking, something was going on, a building had been hit, and there wasn't a plane launched to protect Washington, D.C. And it's just not conceivable. That's a big problem that's never been answered. I mean, they've given excuses. They've changed their story many times. This is one of the instances where Thomas Keane and the 9/11 Commission, afterwards they wrote a book and they said the Pentagon lied to them, and that's what they were talking about. They lied about their response, about why they didn't intercept any of these planes. General Myers changed the story 3 times over like a 3-year period. Every time new evidence came out, he would change his story almost completely to make the previous story a total lie. Why? Why would he do that? It's a big problem. It's not conceivable that we couldn't protect Washington, D.C. when there was planes 5 miles away that could have been there in 5 minutes.
On that note, I'd like to go back to something that Terry talked about briefly, which was a statement made by, actually it was Norman Mineta, who was in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center on 9/11. On that morning, after the 2 plane strikes had happened and they knew that there was an attack underway, Norman Mineta was there and Dick Cheney was there. And here is Norman Mineta's exact quote, okay?
At the 9/11 Commission hearings.
He gave this to the 9/11 Commission, that's correct. This is his words. During the time that the airplane was coming into the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, the point is they knew where these planes were. They were tracking them. And they had plenty of bases which could have scrambled a fighter in time to have shot the thing down. And one has to wonder, hearing this quote from Norman Mineta, who we've got no reason to disbelieve, one has to wonder, what was the standing order? It seems like the standing order was, whatever you do, don't shoot this plane down. I don't know how else to interpret it, and I think that most people hearing it would say, well, it's worth investigating.
And why didn't the 9/11 Commission ask that question? It seems like the obvious question to ask after Norman Mineta made that statement. Let's get this guy in here and ask him what order.
Right. And if there was a stand-down order, going back to what we've been talking about, did Al-Qaeda have the means to issue a stand-down order? I don't think so. And the other thing that was happening on 9/11 that we all know about, and I don't know how many else out there do, is that there were multiple war games happening on 9/11, which were not routine war games. They were really unusual ones involving key military targets and hijacked aircraft. And it got to the point on the morning of 9/11 when some of the air traffic controllers in tracking these planes, including the hijacked planes, had to deal with false radar blips that were inserted into their monitors as part of these war games. Again, coincidence that all these things were happening on 9/11, and it was so bad that some of the air traffic controllers, when they were given reports of the ongoing hijackings, said, is this real or is this one of the games? You know, now that's not evidence, that's not proof. I'm a lawyer, I'll tell you that's not proof. But you add it all together with everything else and the physical impossibilities we've already talked about, and you say, this is just stunning. Why is everyone not out in the streets demanding a real investigation?